The sun had barely begun its descent over the small, tranquil village of Maplewood. A blanket of warmth and safety enveloped the town, but it was here, beneath the surface, where something sinister lay in wait. The village was known for its peaceful demeanor and friendly inhabitants, making the creeping dread that slowly seeped into its core all the more unsettling. Eli Tanner, a young and adventurous miner, had recently settled in Maplewood. He had grown tired of city life and was drawn to the simplicity and solitude of the village. His new home was a modest wooden cabin on the outskirts of town, nestled against the dense forest that stretched out beyond the village's borders. Eli was a seasoned Minecraft player, and was well acquainted with the game's many challenges and adventures. He found solace in the game's familiar mechanics and the thrill of discovering new landscapes and treasures. One cool autumn evening, Eli ventured into the forest to mine resources for his new home. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows that danced and flickered among the trees. As he wandered deeper into the forest, Eli stumbled upon an old, abandoned mineshaft. It was partially collapsed and overgrown with vines, but curiosity got the better of him. With a flicker of torchlight, Eli descended into the darkness. The mineshaft was a labyrinth of twisting tunnels and cavernous rooms, and Eli's torchlight cast eerie, shifting shadows on the walls. He worked diligently, gathering valuable ores and precious gems. As he ventured deeper, however, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The air grew colder, and an unsettling silence settled around him. His footsteps echoed unnervingly off the stone walls. After hours of mining, Eli found himself in a large, open chamber. It was different from the rest of the mine shaft. Its walls were etched with strange symbols, and the floor was covered in an unfamiliar, dark substance. As he examined the symbols, a chill ran down his spine. They seemed almost alive, writhing and shifting as if trying to convey a message. A sudden gust of wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing Eli's torch. He fumbled in the darkness, his heart pounding in his chest. Just as he managed to relight his torch, a cold, eerie whisper reached his ears. It was a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from every direction at once. Eli strained to make out the words, but they were incoherent and unsettling. He quickly packed his tools and decided it was time to leave. As he retraced his steps, he noticed something strange. The tunnels seemed different. They were less familiar, as if the mineshaft itself had shifted. The walls seemed to close in on him, and the shadows grew darker and more oppressive. When Eli finally emerged from the mineshaft, the sun had set, and the village was bathed in an otherworldly twilight. He hurried back to his cabin, feeling a growing sense of dread. The symbols he had seen in the mineshaft haunted him, and the whispers lingered in his mind. That night, Eli lay in bed, trying to shake off the unsettling experience. Sleep came fitfully, and he awoke several times to strange noises outside his cabin. The whispers from the mineshaft seemed to echo through the trees, and he could have sworn he saw shadowy figures moving just beyond the edge of the forest. Days passed, and the feeling of unease in Maplewood grew stronger. The villagers seemed oblivious to the growing darkness, but Eli couldn't ignore the signs. Strange occurrences became more frequent, missing tools, odd symbols appearing in his cabin, and whispers that seemed to follow him wherever he went. One evening, Eli decided to investigate the mineshaft again, determined to uncover the source of the malevolent force. Armed with better gear and a sense of grim resolve, he ventured into the depths once more. This time, he was more prepared for the darkness and the whispers. As he delved deeper into the mineshaft, the symbols grew more intricate and disturbing. The shadows seemed to come alive, writhing and stretching in unnatural ways. Eli's torch flickered, casting grotesque shapes on the walls. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into a single, haunting voice that seemed to call his name. He reached the large chamber again, but it was different now. The dark substance on the floor had formed into grotesque shapes, and the symbols had become more vivid and menacing. Eli's heart raced as he approached the center of the chamber, where a large, dark altar stood. It was covered in the same dark substance, and the symbols were etched into its surface. As he examined the altar, he heard a sudden, sharp crack behind him. He spun around, his torch illuminating a figure standing in the shadows. It was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes and an expression of malevolent intent. The figure wore a cloak of darkness that seemed to absorb the light, and Eli's blood ran cold as he realized what he was facing. Herobrine. The legend of Herobrine was one that Eli had heard many times, a mythical figure said to haunt the world of Minecraft. According to the legend, Herobrine was a mysterious entity with the power to manipulate the game world and torment players. Eli had always dismissed it as a mere myth, but now, faced with the eerie figure, he could no longer deny its existence. Herobrine's eyes glowed with an unnatural light as he stepped forward, his presence exuding an aura of dread. Eli tried to back away, but the shadows seemed to close in around him, trapping him in the chamber. Herobrine raised a hand, and the dark substance on the floor began to writhe and twist, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out for Eli. Desperately, Eli fought to keep his wits. He grabbed a handful of the precious gems he had mined and threw them at Herobrine. The gems scattered across the chamber, and for a moment, Herobrine hesitated, his form flickering like a bad connection. Taking advantage of the distraction, Eli turned and fled, sprinting through the winding tunnels of the mineshaft. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows seemed to close in around him. The walls of the mineshaft shifted and twisted, making it difficult to find his way. Eli's torchlight barely penetrated the encroaching darkness. Finally, he emerged from the mineshaft, gasping for breath. The village of Maplewood was bathed in the eerie light of dawn, and the oppressive feeling seemed to lift slightly. Eli knew he had to warn the villagers, but when he reached the village square, he found it eerily quiet. The villagers were nowhere to be seen. Eli searched the village frantically, but it was as if they had vanished into thin air. The silence was deafening, and the whispers seemed to follow him wherever he went. In a moment of desperation, Eli returned to his cabin and began to scour the place for anything that might help him understand what was happening. He found an old journal hidden in a drawer, a journal belonging to the previous occupant of the cabin. The journal contained notes about strange occurrences in the village and mentions of a dark presence in the forest. One entry, dated many years earlier, described a similar experience to Eli's own. It spoke of a powerful entity that had haunted the mineshaft and terrorized the village. The journal's final entry was a warning. "Beware the shadows that whisper, for they are not what they seem." As Eli read the final entry, he felt a cold breeze sweep through the cabin. The shadows on the walls seemed to move and writhe, and the whispers grew louder, echoing in his ears. Herobrine's presence was closing in once more. Desperate and determined, Eli knew he had to confront Herobrine and end the nightmare that had befallen Maplewood. He gathered his remaining supplies and prepared for one final confrontation. He would return to the mineshaft and confront the entity that had brought darkness to his new home. The descent into the mineshaft was even more treacherous than before. The shadows seemed to conspire against him, and the whispers were a constant, gnawing presence in his mind. As he reached the large chamber again, he found Herobrine waiting for him. The figure of Herobrine was more menacing than ever, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Eli took a deep breath and approached the dark altar. He knew he had to destroy the source of the darkness and banish Herobrine once and for all. With a sense of grim determination, Eli began to dismantle the altar, tearing apart the dark substance and defacing the symbols etched into its surface. As he worked, Herobrine's form flickered and writhed, his anger palpable. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of rage and despair. Eli's hands shook as he worked, but he pressed on, determined to finish what he had started. The darkness seemed to recede as the altar was dismantled, and Herobrine's form began to waver. With one final effort, Eli destroyed the last of the dark substance, and Herobrine's figure let out a chilling, otherworldly scream before vanishing into the shadows. The mineshaft fell silent, the oppressive feeling lifting as the darkness dissipated. Eli emerged from the depths, exhausted but victorious. The village of Maplewood was still eerily quiet, but there was a sense of peace in the air. The whispers had faded, and the shadows no longer seemed threatening. Eli knew that the darkness had been driven away, but the memories of the encounter would stay with him forever. Maplewood slowly returned to its peaceful state, and Eli continued to live in his cabin, always wary.